Alright, making this video to show off my collection of about 90 pre-recorded reel-to-reel tapes. Start with this one, a treasure. Black Sabbath, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, 7.5 IPS. Love this album. When I bought it, I found that the tape was probably a little bit older or a little bit more used than it should be. Some of the high end is gone. Still sounds incredible. Obviously an incredible album. First Black Sabbath album. Love it. This one's at 3.5 IPS, unfortunately. Still pretty good. Volume 4 is a beast of a tape, because that one was recorded at 7.5 IPS. Fantastic. Yeah. Split Ends by The Move. Not my favorite album, but it was cool. I got a good deal on it. Still in the sealed shrink wrap. Another 7.5 IPS. Quicksilver Messenger Service. These are pretty common. This band must have been really big in the 60s. I like it. I love this one. Heavy Stuff. 7.5 IPS. Mountain Climbing. This band is a beast. Leslie West is a machine. This one is really super rare, Nantucket Sleigh Ride by Mountain. 3.75 IPS, but super fucking awesome. Still sounds great. Tommy by The Who, the double reel. This one's, someone had put this on a 5-inch reel, probably busted up the original reel for some reason. Still sounds good, still works just fine. Now, this album here, After the Gold Rush by Neil Young, these are usually found at 3.75 IPS, and it says 3.75. However, this is a very special tape because it was accidentally recorded at 7.5 IPS. This is known to happen for a number of Neil Young albums. After the Gold Rush can be found at 7.5 IPS. Another album I know every once in a while comes up at 7.5 IPS is Who's Next by The Who. This one is one of my prize items of the collection because it sounds fucking amazing. Absolutely incredible. Okay, so here's another example of a tape that was sort of accidentally recorded at 7.5 IPS. James Gang Rides Again. Every copy you'll see is 3.75, but the company that actually went through the effort of changing the label here to show that it was recorded at 7.5. This is really super rare. Obviously sounds great. My understanding is that sometimes, you know, they would just be recorded at the wrong speed, but some error at the factory. The record company would order it for 3.75, and they would just wind up coming back at 7.5. Thirds by the James Gang. This is a great tape. Typically, this one's found at 7.5 IPS. Love Joe Walsh, obviously. This is a fantastic album. Now here's a really super rare tape. Your Album by the James Gang, the first one to feature Joe Walsh. This one's at 3.75 IPS. I got in a serious bidding war for this one. It's absolutely amazing. John Denver. You know, I like John Denver. His voice sounds amazing on this album. I really would like to get my hands on some more of his tapes. 7.5 IPS. Really good tape. I bought this still in the shrink wrap. Can't hate John Denver. Except for driving his plane into a mountain. What a dumb way to die. Sorry, John Denver. This is a great tape. One of these went on eBay for like $800 the other day. That's insane. But obviously a great album, loved album. These are all recorded at 7.5 IPS. Songs for Beginners by Graham Nash. This tape is actually pretty common. You can get it without spending too much. 7.5 IPS, it's a good one. This Heavy Cream, the compilation album of like their best songs, biggest hits. These are always recorded at 7.5 IPS, so they sound really awesome. Whoa Ya Ya by Osabisa. Kind of like a world music pop band. Just about this because I thought the cover was wicked cool. It's at 3 3/4 IPS. Sounds good, but I really like to get my hands on some of their 7.5 IPS recordings. There's a couple other albums by them that were released standard at 7.5. Steve Miller Band's number 5. This is another great one that you can find without paying too much. 7.5 IPS. Just a sweet album. I wish there was more Steve Miller Band released on Reel to Reel. But I think this is the only one that was released on 7.5 IPS. Some of the others can be found at the slow speed. Okay, this one is probably my rarest. I have not seen any mention of this tape on the internet or anywhere. It is not known to exist besides this copy I got. I'm sure there are others out there, but man, this tape is great. Many Rivers to Cross, Jimmy Cliff, just a freaking great reggae album. Pretty much impossible to find reggae on Reel to Reel. I've seen one other reggae tape in my time. Very cool. If anyone's ever seen another one of these, I'd love to know. Tiny Tim's second album. This thing is kind of just all over the place. Bananas piece of music. This was sealed when I bought it. 7.5 IPS. It's a fun one. I'm gonna get into the Soul collection now. This is something by Diana Ross here. This is her, I guess this is the self-titled first album. This one came out in 7.5 IPS. Sounds great. Well, this Lou Rawls album is all screwed up, so, you know, whatever. I should fix that loose tape there. Anyway, I don't think I've ever played this one. Percy Sledge. God, I love Percy Sledge. When a Man Loves a Woman was his big hit, but he's got so many great songs. Take Time to Know Her is probably my favorite of his. Yeah, 3 3/4 IPS. I can't find any Percy Sledge tapes at 7.5. Very unfortunate. Another Percy Sledge best of. He is the man. If you like sweet soul singers, he's just the best. It sounds like this. Earth, Wind, and Fire. I like them all right. Got this probably pretty cheap. Yeah. Let's see. 3 3/4 IPS. Here's a good tape. Facts of Life by Bobby Womack. One thing about Reel to Reel is that distorted guitars sound absolutely incredible because the high end of the overdrive comes through so well. This album has a lot of crunchy guitars on it, so it's one of my favorites. 7.5 IPS. They weren't kidding around when they put this tape out. This is my only James Brown tape, Hot Pants. It's kind of like a long jam where he just shouts over it in all sorts of crazy ways. And it's 7.5 IPS. This was sealed when I bought it too. It's a good listen. Yeah. Blues and Pants. Jerry Butler is an incredible soul singer. There's a couple more Reel to Reels that were put out under his name, and I would like to get some more. 3 3/4 IPS, unfortunately. Joe Tex, also the man, fantastic. He had a lot of albums come out on Reel to Reel as well, mostly on 3 3/4, but he's a beast. Him and Jerry Butler don't get enough recognition nowadays. Chambers Brothers rock. They're kind of a psychedelic angle to their soul music, and they're freaking sweet. Now let's see. I think this one's 7.5 IPS. Feels heavy. There are other albums I have by them came out at 7.5 IPS too. Yeah. Another Chambers Brothers there. This album's probably my favorite by them. This one's 7.5 IPS. New Generation by the Chambers Brothers. Another massive album. 3 3/4 IPS. When I say it's unfortunate that they came out in 3 3/4, I'm not kidding. People say that, but it's really true. 3 3/4 just doesn't sound mind-blowing the same way as 7.5 does if you've got a well-preserved tape. So as much as I like the way tape sounds, and the tape sound does carry over pretty well on the 3 3/4, just the incredible fidelity, keeping the high range of the sonic spectrum. You know, a lot of singers, a lot of guitars, brass instruments, drums, have a lot of high range frequencies, and that stuff just comes over so well. You say, what the hell is that? The things you haven't heard before will stand out. Al Green's the man. This is a great album, recorded at 7.5 IPS. You could pick this one up relatively cheaply, actually, when it comes up. Al Green's Living for You. This one was also released on quad, but I never pursued any quad tapes because I don't have a quad deck. So I don't know really what I would do to play quad albums, but it's an amazing 2-track. Well, you know, 4-track, 2 each ways. 7.5 IPS. Really glad to have that one. This Isaac Hayes album is a double album. This thing weighs probably more than any other single tapes I have. There's so much tape on this reel. 7.5 IPS. Absolutely amazing. This is a good one. The Isaac Hayes movement is great. I just love Isaac Hayes. He's so much more than Chef on South Park. This one is 3 3/4 IPS. He had another album released on Reel to Reel, Hot Buttered Soul. That one I don't have. That one's 3 3/4 IPS too, but it goes for a lot of money, so I never got a copy of my own. This is a great, great album. To be continued. This one came out on 7.5 IPS. It's fantastic. He is such a great singer. Now, if anybody has not heard of Gabber Sabo, check him out. Check out the album Dreams. I have a whole bunch of his tapes because I got pretty obsessed with him, and I bought as many as I could. There's only one album released on Reel to Reel of his that I don't have yet, and that is Dreams, and the price of those has gone up like crazy since I was buying tapes. One of these days, I will get one to complete the collection, but Wind, Sky, and Diamonds by Gabber Sabo. This is a little best of in 3 3/4 IPS. These are pretty common, not as hard to get your hands on, not too expensive. Gypsy 66 by Gabber Sabo. Gary McFarlane is a beast as well. I think, no, he's not the one who plays the marimbas, but this is such a good album. And this came out at 7.5 IPS. Really, really good. Bacchanal by Gabber Sabo. Fantastic album where, I think this is the one where he does some vocals on it. He's got Kingfisher. Oh yeah, 3 Kingfishers. 7.5 IPS. It sounds so good. Jazz Raga is one of his most well-liked albums. 7.5 IPS. Thank God. More Sorcery. This one's fantastic as well. I think it came out right after Gypsy 66 at 7.5 IPS. Thank you, Sky Records, for being serious about releasing these albums. Spellbinder, another kind of favorite in the jazz community of Gabber Sabos. This album's great. These go for a lot for some reason. I mean, it's great, but I just don't really understand why some Gabber Sabo albums go for way more than others. The Sorcerer is freaking amazing. This thing came out at 7.5 IPS. Actually, I think More Sorcery came after this. It's a little sequel. Not Gypsy 66, but this is one of his earlier ones. Recorded in 1967. This is a cool album. This guy, Bob Thiel, featuring Gabber Sabo, doing pop songs from the time, like Light My Fire by the Doors. Yeah, this is a great album. It's not traditional Gabber Sabo style. I'm going to go through some other stuff. Do some other genres. Four Seasons. Oh man, that Freddie, whatever his name is an incredible singer. And I bought this because I wanted to hear Frankie Valli. That's it. I wanted to hear his voice on tape. 7.5 IPS. Sounds good. This Bette Midler album rules. She's got a couple others came out at 7.5 IPS. And, yeah, I'm not so much into this type of music, but it's just a really fantastic album. It's really fun. She belts it out. Nancy and Lee. I looked for a copy of this for a long time. This is an incredible, incredible album. Lee Hazelwood is fantastic, and he's got a couple other reel-to-reel tapes out there, but they are really hard to find. So this is great. It's got that song with Some Velvet Morning. Look up Some Velvet Morning by Nancy and Lee. Incredible. Good and the Bad, the Ugly soundtrack. Came out at 7.5 IPS. I was into the exotica genre for a little while, which is this orchestra music that's supposed to sound like it's from the South Pacific or take you away to the seaside or something. Ports of Pleasure. Wes Baxter put out a lot of these exotica albums. I can't play this one, unfortunately. Don't have a 2-track, but I got it in a big box of other tapes. Gary McFarland. Yeah, so Gary McFarland, he rules. He is a band leader and plays like the xylophone marimba or something like that. Verve Records. There's them and Sky Records put out a lot of kind of psychedelic jazz with Gabber Sabo. It's also on those labels. Here's another exotica tape. Some more exotica there. These are all a little bit older, so they generally all came out at 7.5 IPS. In a Summer Garden, it's a little bit more like classical. Billy Vaughn did all this exotica stuff. Blue Eye was his too. Segovia on Stage. This guy, obviously like the greatest classical guitar player, or most popular classical guitar player of all time, known to re-popularize the classical guitar, take it out of the image of it being a peasant instrument, made it fancy again. Ravi Shankar. This is just fun to have because something like this sounds really great on reel-to-reel. That instrument, the sitar, there's a lot of intricacies in the higher register, and Sounds fantastic. And for percussion, it's a cool tape. Very groovy. Socket tool. Okay, Cannonball Adderley. This album's amazing. Live album. You can hear the audience going crazy the entire time. It's just so fantastic. 7.5 IPS. He's got a couple more reel-to-reel tapes out there. I would like to get another one. I love Wes Montgomery. All his tapes, well, almost all of them came out at 7.5 IPS. And A Day in the Life, probably my favorite one. This album is sick. And I love Barbra Streisand. Her tapes can be had pretty cheap. A lot of them are at 7.5 IPS. People, well-loved Barbra Streisand album. 7.5 IPS, thank God. Okay, the first Barbra Streisand album here, and the second Barbra Streisand album, both at 7.5 IPS. These are my two favorites of hers. She's like, for those of you who haven't heard too much Barbra Streisand, she sounds like a maniac a lot of the time when she sings. That's where she gets that image from. She's just a beast and she doesn't hold back. She's got an incredible voice. If you can tune into that kind of music and get into it, she is the best. What about today? This thing, 3 3/4. So I think most of these are 3 3/4. Greatest hits. Aha, My Name is Barbara. 7.5 IPS. Lazy Afternoon. Doesn't she look good in that picture? Good God. Barbara Jones Streisand. The eponymous album. Oh yeah. This is classical stuff, 2-track. These Livingston master tape treasury. These are not worth too much, but I think they're 2-track classical. So someday I'll get a 2-track, maybe not, but I'll play them. This weird thing, I don't know why they packaged it like this with the frickin' tassel. Keep it shut, but the tape kind of, this is so weird. Anyway, the tape is in this weird indented piece of the case. This is crazy. So this is probably the late 50s. And this came out, don't see a date actually, but notice that for a long play tape, it costs $12. If you were gonna do some inflation math, $12 in the 60s was like $100. So it just goes to show you, these tapes were so expensive back when they were new. Correct me if I'm wrong on that inflation figure. I just know it was a lot to pay for a single album back then. Got Leo Adeo, great exotica orchestra leader. There's some classical 7.5 IPS stuff. And let's see, the last few. Organ Orgy. Had to buy this one just for the cover and the title. It's just a solo organ, and it's pretty intense. Not really my thing. Horace Janowski, So It's Up. I think these albums are so funny. These they just try to sell the album by putting a hot girl on the cover. you know, it can be fun music, but it cracks me up sometimes. Some Hawaiian stuff. This music is great. It is like extremely relaxing, and the instrumentation is really unique. So if anyone wants to find some music to just really chill to and like to look back in time a little bit, check out some Exotica, especially Les Baxter. Simon and Garfunkel, someone decided to fuck that one all up. Herb Alpert, he's alright. He's a big deal. I'm not the biggest fan. And the last one to show you guys is this Hank Williams Jr. album. It's cool. 7.5 IPS. Got it off of Craigslist. Alright, that's the collection. Thanks for watching. Go out and get some reel-to-reel tapes.